Welcome to the Social Housing Podcast from Voicescape, the only podcast dedicated to helping social landlords build sustainable tenancies. During this series of podcasts, we'll be speaking to leaders from the social housing sector and beyond, hopefully challenging the status quo a little bit, and also stimulating discussion around how technology can be better utilised to help build sustainable tenancies. I'm your host, John Doyle, the Chief Exec and founder of Voicescape.
We have to match some very, very good organizations now around customer communication. If you think about, the likes of the experience you get with the likes of Amazon generally, or other large national customer service providers, I don't think that the housing sector has kept up with that. And actually, again, if you think about the service we provide, that's what we've got to strive for, really. It's not good enough to say, well, we do all this stuff to help people, so actually we don't need to worry about having kind of super sharp communication with people when they call us and focused, comms and sort of getting all that right. You do. That's the standard we've got to meet, because actually for most people, that's how they judge you. If you get a good experience as a customer, that's a big tick in a box against an organization. And actually that is just as important for a lot of people as the other stuff that we do. And I think sometimes, because we focus so much on where we can add extra value, and rightly so, because we do that, we've forgotten that the fundamental aspect of communicating well with a customer and giving them a great experience is really important.
Welcome to the Social Housing Podcast. My name's Lewis Murray, and I'll be stepping in for John Doyle in this week's episode, where I'll be talking to Steve Hayes, Head of Communications at Citizen. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the important role that tailored communication can have in giving great customer experience and helping tenants to feel safe and secure in their homes. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Steve Hayes. So Steve, tell us about Citizen and the mission of your role as Head of Communications.
Citizen is we're a large social housing provider in the West Midlands. So we have 30,000 homes spaced out across mainly Coventry, Birmingham, Hereford and Worcester, some small outlying areas, but all of our housing stock is within the West Midlands. So my job as Head of Communications really is to make sure that all of the customers in those properties, which is a lot of them, as you can imagine, 30,000 homes, and all of our staff as well, all 1,000 of them, are really informed, engaged, and hopefully a little bit inspired as well about what we do. That in its broadest sense, that really is what we're about. We're proud to be an organisation that has a social purpose, and I think that adds hugely to my role as a head of comms. It's much easier to do this work when you have a purpose that you can keep referencing back to. So that really is, that's what Citizen's about, and that's what I do.
Great. So what do you see as essentially the role of communications within a social housing organisation, and just how pivotal is that to the success of projects that you're engaging with customers, and how it comes to communicating with customers as well as colleagues?
It's hugely important, and I think it's often underestimated, the significance of communication. But I guess if you think about how we all live our lives, and certainly how we operate as customers, communication is the kind of fundamental bit of that, really. So for us, being able to effectively communicate with all of those customers in those many properties across our sort of area on a real kind of diverse range of topics, but to do that in a way that makes it easy for them to understand, to take in, is hugely important. So I think it would be important for any organisation, but I think when you do what we do, which is obviously providing someone with a home, think about the most important things in your life, and your home would figure really quite high up there. It's going to be in most people's top three, isn't it? Is after your family, probably about the most important thing you've got is a home. So when you're providing a service of that nature, and obviously because we work in social housing, it's people who need that home and have often waited quite a long time for it. It's really, really important that you get that right. It's quite an intimate service, and I think it's also an opportunity. If you communicate well with customers, obviously, as a social housing provider, you can offer more, and you can intervene potentially and offer more support than just a home. That's where social housing providers can offer real value, I think. And it's the communication and the feeling and the ability of being able to keep that as two-way that often allows us to do that and to sort of go the extra mile and do more than just providing a home, because I think that's really the value that we offer. So, and I think more broadly, if we think about social housing, I would be really interested, I always say this, I'd be really interested to go out into the street and ask 50 people what social housing is. They'd probably tell me to go away or say, why are you asking me that? But if we did that as a survey and we actually sort of asked people, I think you'd find there'd be very few of them who would be able to properly articulate what social housing is. So I think there's, on the one side, there's a really important part of this being that we obviously have to focus around great communication with our customers. I do also think that we've got to up our game as a sector around how we communicate and clearly convey the work that we do. Because, there'll be people, if anybody's watching this who works for a social housing organisation, there are still our own customers who would openly refer to us as the council, for example. And there is only, to a degree, there is only so much you can do about that. But I do think we have got better, but I think as a sector, we do need to do more to make it clear just what we do and what the contribution of that is. Because if you can't do that effectively, then of course you're never going to exert the influence that the potential is there. The potential of housing is huge, for the economy and for society. So we need to do that justice. But I think where the housing sector has got to up its game and has been in some ways is this point that we have to match some very, very good organizations now around customer communication. If you think about, the likes of the experience you get with the likes of Amazon generally, or other large national customer service providers, I don't think that the housing sector has kept up with that. And actually, again, if you think about the service we provide, that's what we've got to strive for, really. It's not good enough to say, well, we do all this stuff to help people, so actually we don't need to worry about having kind of super sharp communication with people when they call us and focused, comms and sort of getting all that right. You do. That's the standard we've got to meet, because actually for most people, that's how they judge you. If you get a good experience as a customer, that's a big tick in a box against an organization. And actually that is just as important for a lot of people as the other stuff that we do. And I think sometimes, because we focus so much on where we can add extra value, and rightly so, because we do that, we've forgotten that the fundamental aspect of communicating well with a customer and giving them a great experience is really important. And I think one final thing I would say on communications in housing is, don't be obsessed with customer communication at the expense of staff communication. Because I think one thing that all organizations should have learned over the last year, if they didn't know it already, is you have to make sure that your workforce is engaged and informed. It sounds like an obvious thing. It's often underinvested in and not done particularly well. And the reason for that isn't just that being a responsible employer is the right thing to do and has its own value in terms of attracting the right staff and keeping the right staff. It's because the service that your customers will receive is a direct reflection of how well your staff are engaged and motivated. So if you don't do that bit to invest in internal communication and getting that right, and making sure you embed the culture of your organization, and making sure people have a very clear understanding of what you do and what their part is in that, then you'll compromise the service delivery at the end of it. And I think that's a connection that sometimes gets missed, is what we're talking about, the whole package here. That's how you deliver great services. That's how you deliver great communication, is by having an engaged, an engaged and sort of motivated workforce that's very much bought into what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Well, there's two sides of that communication, isn't there? There's the mass communication that you do directly through campaigns and so on and so forth with customers, but then there's the everyday touch points that come from the frontline staff, whether that's a repair that gets carried out, or if that's somebody who's contacting to talk about money advice, or any of the other services that are provided by Citizen. All of that has to come across to your customers, for them to have a great experience at all those touch points. So I totally see that from a customer experience standpoint and why that's so important. But is there any implications sector-wide to communications in light of the government white paper released back in November?
There are. And I think, again, if you look at that and you look at what that white paper has said and the emphasis that places on housing providers to be clear with customers, you've got the charter. And if you look at the 7 principles of that charter, at least, I was having a look at them just before this to refresh my memory, at least half of those communication is absolutely pivotal to. So we think of things like performance and being clear about performance. Well, that's going to rely on clear communication and trying to find engaging ways to share that information with people. You look at things like complaints and how they're dealt with. Well, communication and effective communication is absolutely central to how you manage complaints. We've done a lot of work around that. And also having your voice heard is a central part of it. And so again, that two-way communication with customers is huge. So if you look at what's coming forward in that white paper, a massive element of that is effective communication, conveying messages clearly, being transparent, being open, and making sure that there is also an opportunity for customers to give to feedback and that your work really reflects what they want. And I think that definitely is we recently have recruited a new customer assurance committee. We took a completely different approach this time because we recognized actually that there are some really passionate representatives for customers in social housing providers. We've had some in the past, but they haven't necessarily been representative of the wider customer base. And so what we did was a kind of quite a large scale recruitment campaign for that committee. And what we've ended up with is a really good representative spread. We had an amazing response. We had about 400 applications for the 8 roles that we've got. So we were able to choose people that were kind of geographically spread out, demographically kind of representative of our tenant base. And what you're getting now is, and also I think the questions we're asking them are different. So you mentioned it, the transactional interactions, potentially not always at the focus of previous tenant groups, whereas now there's a really good mix of kind of making sure that those customers are involved. So I think, I always say this, and I wouldn't I, because I work in communications, but that, there's a reason that, there's a reason that the UK government just spent, I think it was a couple of million quid on that shiny new briefing room that you now see. I mean, you could say that's extortionate, but it's because they recognise that how you convey messages is everything really in terms of how people understand something. You can do the best work or have the best intention, but if you can't get that across effectively, actually it's lost. So communication is a massive part of how we continue to provide a great service in social housing, as it is in any sector or service.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I would really wanted to talk to you about. Is as you're communicating with your tenant base that grows and has such diverse needs and so much diversity in the area, it's really interesting to know how you're able to communicate messages out to everybody to make sure that the message lands and to make sure that it's received in the right way, and that people really understand both what the message is telling them and why that's relevant to them and their day-to-day life. And I think a great example of that is your recent fire safety project. Now, that project sounds like there was a lot of very technical language that had to be communicated across to customers. So can you talk us through some of the steps that you took and your use of data-led comms to ensure that those messages really did land with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point there, data-led, kind of is a hugely important bit that has historically, been missing, certainly from, and I know from other organisations as well. Is this so before I talk about the fire safety bit particularly, I think there is this broadly what we have to get much better at is thinking very carefully about how we use the resource that we have to communicate effectively. So I think if I think back to my early days in the housing sector, which were kind of 7-8 years ago, it was still very much a kind of the main way of communicating with customers at the organisations I was working for at that time was a customer newsletter, which went out every quarter. Now, you were spending thousands and thousands of pounds on postage and printing for that. A lot of the information ended up being out of date, because by the time 3 months came around, it was kind of the stuff from the early part of the period was sort of really old and not very engaging. You were asking customers to sift through 20 odd pages to find the one bit that might be relevant to them. And there was no thought really about, is this what they want? Is what's going to land something that they're going to engage with? And crucially, no way of measuring how successful that was. And if you think about, if we were to kind of go back and say, you were starting from scratch, how do we communicate effectively with our customers? If you were to make that business case, it would be a terrible business case to say, I need 15 grand to print and post 5,000 or whatever, 10,000 newsletters to customers with out-of-date information that makes them sift through it. And you know what? At the end of it, I'm going to have absolutely no way of telling you how many of our customers engage with that. So it's kind of that's the thing we've had to grapple with. And I think I've said this before, and it's an unpopular view. My view is the newsletter model is dead and has been for quite some time. I don't think anybody. I think expecting a customer to read that is unreasonable. There might be in some rural areas and more remote places, and where you've got digital exclusion, there might be more of a case for it. But the point is, if there's a case for it, fine. If there isn't a case for it, it's an irresponsible way to spend what is essentially our tenants' money, really, to communicate with them. And it's just a poor way of providing a service. So I think what we've done over the last couple of years is really start to flip that on its head and say, let's take a look at the demographic of our customer base. Let's think about let's think about capturing data about how they want to be communicated with, which that task still isn't complete, because that's a monumental thing to do. But where we have email addresses for people, why would we not just send them an email? Why would we not communicate with them digitally? Because that allows us to see how many people are engaging directly. We have, so for example, we sent out, we've had real issues in the Coventry area with fly tipping and waste during the pandemic. And it's reached a stage where, to be honest, we just needed to get something out. We've worked with Coventry City Council on a joint letter, and the brief for that was post it out to every single resident who lives in a block in Coventry, which is, I think it was about 10,000 people. So clearly you can imagine straight away the postage costs for that are monumental. And actually we looked and we kind of said, how about we approach this slightly differently? We've got, I think we had something like 6,000 of those customers we had emails for, or 7,000. The bulk of them we had emails for, and the other amount we didn't. So we kind of said, look, for everybody we've got an email address for, let's send them an email, because actually we'll be able to see whether they've opened it. We'll be able to see whether they've engaged with any of the things on it. I had a look before I came on this call. I can see that 60% of the people we sent that to have opened it. So, I can't say whether they've read the whole thing, but I can say that they've opened it. If we'd have sent all of that, for all the people we sent letters to, we had no other way of communicating them. I don't know whether they've opened it. I don't know whether they've read it. I have absolutely no idea. And we've saved all of the money that would have been, we've saved kind of several £1,000s there. So it sounds like a simple thing, but actually the housing sector, again, in my experience, hasn't particularly wrestled with those things particularly well, and hasn't been willing to be brave and say, do you know what, we need to stop doing this and start doing something different. So that I think is a general kind of background to how we need to increasingly approach comms. Is you've got to have, it's got to be intelligence led. So the fire safety thing was a good example of this, I think. What happened is we own about 40 tower blocks. Most of them, in fact, are in Coventry. And as for anybody who owns tower blocks will know that there are occasions where there are fires. Mostly 99.999% of those fires are contained in the buildings and dealt with, put out by the fire brigade, and there's no injuries or ill effects. other than obviously the psychological damage, which is huge for somebody who lives in a tower block. But of course, the spectre of Grenfell still looms large. 3 years on now. Actually, it's longer than that, isn't it? It's 4 years, I think, this year. Grenfell. So we are still very conscious all this time on that if you live in a tower block and there's a fire, the likelihood is that's the first thought that's going to go through your head. So we had a fire in Coventry about a year ago, I think, maybe a little bit further back. And it was dealt with. It was a nasty fire, but it was dealt with. It was contained. The building performed exactly as it should. But what we'd found is that pretty much everybody in that building had evacuated, or a large proportion of people had evacuated before the fire service arrived, which of course is completely against the advice that we would give them. And I think in the aftermath of that, we spoke to lots of residents in that block, and we kind of tried to get a sense of what their knowledge was about the fire safety protocols for the building, and found that actually the ways that we had tried to get that information across were just not effective. So we obviously share fire safety information with every customer that lives in a tower block, but to be honest, it was a fire safety policy which was quite technical, quite long. Is it reasonable to expect people to? It's quite a lot to ask for people to sit down and actually read that, let alone kind of keep it to hand and remember it and then react during a sort of panicked moment if they become aware there's a fire in their building. And in this case, what had happened is actually somebody outside had started to film the fire, and they were live streaming it on Facebook. This was a Friday night, and it had thousands and thousands of people looking at it, not just from Coventry, but it looked very much like the start of Grenfell, with the smoke starting to come out of one of the windows, because that was the only place the fire could go. In fact, as I say, it was contained to that flat. No one was hurt. Everything was fine. But if you'd seen that video, I just put myself in the position of someone who was in that building and went on Facebook and saw that. Obviously you would panic, and I think that's a lot of people had just left the building. So we said we need to look at this properly, and we need to do a piece of work for all of our high-rise customers to try to get across, firstly, obviously, to reassure and kind of say, look, you may be aware of a fire that had taken place, but that actually everybody was kept safe. This is how the building performed, but also a bit of an awareness raising piece to kind of say, look, if this happens in your building, this is what you should do. So we kind of thought, what's the best way to do this? And you said it at the start, really, is there's lots of technical information around fire safety, but actually when you boil it down, the fundamental messages are quite simple, really. And for us, of course, the main one is stay in the building unless the fire is in your flat, or that the heat or smoke is affecting you. Of course, evacuate. But for most people, even if you become aware there's a fire in your building, the safest thing for you to do is to stay in that building. So we worked really closely with West Midlands Fire Service, who we work with already, to try and distill down those messages into something that was clear, simple, and engaging. And then we kind of thought, okay, we've got our messages now. What's the best way to sort of get this out there? And actually what we came up with was an animation. So a really simple animation, I think is only about 1 minute and 30 seconds long. And the animation kind of spells out really clearly and simply those key messages, really, which is here's what to do if there's a fire in your building or in your home. And then also here are some things you can do to try and prevent that. So things like not leaving things in communal areas and blocking corridors and stairways, being careful when you smoke and cook, and all those kinds of things. And then, of course, we kind of thought, right, let's think about who our customers are in those blocks. Well, as I said, lots of them in Coventry, some in Birmingham, a very, very diverse customer base. So we knew that there would be language barriers potentially. So we did some research through our translation service and also through some of the teams locally. We also looked at all of the customers in those blocks and their nationalities, and we were able to come up with a list of 7 languages that we knew if we translated into those 7 languages, pretty much everyone would be able to understand at least one of those languages to a good level. We got voiceovers for all of those 7 languages, and we got the fire safety literature translated as well. So the experience for a customer ended up being this. We did post this out because we thought for this it was really, really important, but it was the link between post and digital, I think. So everybody got a really nice kind of really high quality sleeve designed, and it was personalized. So on the front it said, important information about your building and then their first name. So sort of instantly engaging. You folded out a piece of, again, a high quality paper, and in there was your very simple instructions and a QR code that linked you to the animation, and then a separate QR code that kind of said, look, if you need this language translated into any of these, click, scan this QR code and you'll be able to access both this leaflet and the animation in your language. And that's had a really good response. So we can see, again, obviously we can see how many people have accessed the fire safety web page. We can see how many people have accessed the animations. So we're able to measure more than certainly we would have done with just post, how well that's been engaged with. We did actually have a fire again in Coventry about a couple of months back. The feedback obviously is anecdotal. The feedback was that the behaviour was different there, and actually there wasn't the panic. It was a really nasty fire again, quite similar really to the previous one, but again it was contained. Again it was dealt with, no one injured, and our feedback from local teams was that there was a different vibe. So you would hope that that was as a result of what we've done. And I think it's just a good example of trying to think outside the box a little bit, trying to be as, I think the way I put it is, with something like that, a message which is so fundamentally important, one of the most important messages we could possibly convey, it doesn't necessarily have to be convoluted. It doesn't necessarily have to be inaccessible or complicated. It can still be easy to understand, engaging. And you've got to, the discipline is ask as little of your customers as possible for those things. Make it as easy as you can for that person to access that information. And that's what we tried to do.
So the point that I wanted to pick up on was, I think that we do, when we're having interactions and communications, we do like to be treated as individuals, whether that's from our housing providers, if that's from our doctor's surgery, if that's, a Zoom call or a Teams call, or any communication. You want your own personal circumstances to be taken into consideration when you're having that conversation. If I don't speak your language, we're going to have to change the language up. If there could be a number of things which impact how you communicate effectively. So I think what the question that I would want to put to you then, Steve, is how has the recent experience with the fire safety project shaped and influenced what you'll do going forward from here?
I think it has. I mean, I think we would increasingly like that to be the standard. I mean, obviously that's quite a unique thing in terms of being hugely important. But then you could argue that that is the standard we should be reaching, to be honest. So I think increasingly we want to make sure that any communication that we're doing with people reflects their needs really, and to a degree their desires. So we're as I say, we are in the process of a new kind of agenda of capturing the right data, because that's your first part of it, is you have to have the right data. You have to make sure that if a customer needs something in a different language, that you know that, or if they need it in a bigger font, that, or if they prefer emails, that. So we've got some of that data, but it is patchy, so we'll be working on that. And obviously a massive part of that is how you educate staff as well, to make sure that the capturing of that data is accurate, and that when it's captured, you use it, because there's nothing worse. You just create dissatisfaction if you start to retain information about customers and then do nothing with it. So there is it's not uncomplicated, but this is what organizations do, other organizations do. And there are tools out there that will equip you to do that. So we actually had a meeting with ReachDeck, which is an organization responsible, I think they're connected to Browser Loud, which is of course the software that which is basically a screen reader for anyone with hearing impairments or disabilities. And they offer now, they've really sort of upped their game on their service. So they offer things like sort of plain reading tools, which you can put any kind of text into, and it will tell you the reading age and other things like that. They also offer the ability to record kind of translated audio files. So we're looking into how we can harness all of that, and with other providers as well, how we can harness all of those tools to make sure that when we're communicating with someone, it's in the most, again, we're asking as little of them as possible. We're coming to them rather than making them find a way to understand what we're putting out. But I think there's a wider agenda for us, which over the last couple of years has been to basically just up our game across the board on customer experience. So part and parcel of that was our rebrand, in truth, from WM Housing and the subsidiary organisations that sat underneath it. The one brand, one organisation that we was September 2019, easy to lose track of. So actually not that long ago was when we became Citizen. And in that time, the transformation's been quite amazing, really, not only in terms of what we've been able to offer, but I think for staff and the feeling of belonging to one entity and a brand that you can understand and identify with, and values and behaviors that you buy into. And alongside that piece of work, we also did a year-long training program with Mary Gober International. So they're sort of renowned, world-renowned customer service trainers. And every single person in our organization had training as part of that. And that was in recognition of what you said at the beginning of this, was it's in the everyday interactions. So if you focus all of the training around your customer service center, clearly you want those people to be the real kind of experts in customer service, but actually customer service is everybody, and every little interaction and piece of communication that you have, every email that you receive relating to a complaint, for example, every phone call that you make or receive. And it's those interactions that are important. And also a really, really important thing, and again, this is about being data and intelligence led, has been the rollout of our customer experience platform. Because what we've gone from a position where the feedback we had from customers was kind of limited and usually outdated, to now in the moment dashboard, instant feedback from customers relating to those transactional services. So I think every month now we get kind of 5,000 individual pieces of feedback relating to service transactions like repairs, contacts with the customer service center, and the list of services is increasing all the time. We're rolling them out to things like our gardening services, our cleaning services. So we can now see, we get a rating out of 5, much in the same way if you use Sky, for example, they have the same customer experience platform. Is after a service transaction, you'll receive a text that basically says, please rate us out of 5 and tell us why you did that. It's been transformational for us, and the ownership that that's given now to teams in the organization as it's rolled out as well, but also just the intelligence. So we, for example, if anybody scores us 1 or 2, that's always followed up with a phone call from someone from our customer service center to understand why they scored that in more detail, and to frankly to do something to resolve that. And even just that small thing now means that you've got potentially tens or hundreds of customers who would have just been left unhappy and discontented and have no way of expressing that or having it dealt with. Now we're actually not only understanding, we're able to pick up directly with them, and we're able to then learn lessons that we can use across the organization. And often you'll find it's little tweaks, it's small things, but that is so important. And it's made a massive difference around our communication. We've done lots of work to try and embed the lessons from the Mary Gober training, to embed our values. And it's been very, very successful. You know, our customer satisfaction scores all the way through the pandemic have been really, really high. I think on average 4.6 out of 5, which with a massive volume of repairs that we do is quite amazing, really. But yes, the intelligence that's given us is massive. And you're right, it is all about being treated as an individual. If you look at the principles that Mary Gober International have lived by and been very successful with their training program over the years, you'd look at that and you'd go, well, this is all common sense. But actually, it's amazing how we call it common sense. It's actually sometimes quite uncommon because it's seen as obvious, so we don't do it. And actually just those simple tools, things like being in the black and not in the red, and things like personal control circles, things like starting with a positive first response, all things that we would think, well, I do that anyway, but you don't always. So it's that mindset change. And again, I think what this hammers home is, you can have great systems to assess customer satisfaction, get intelligence on your customers, but you've got to engage staff with it as well. You can't do it at the expense of your staff, because they're your ambassadors every single day talking to your customers. So it's as much about cultural change internally as it is about having the tools to understand and provide a great service to your customers.
Absolutely. So When it comes to engaging with those customers on that day-to-day basis, I suppose one thing I did want to pick up on actually is you mentioned there about having those immediate responses. Someone scores you a 1 or a 2, you really want to know why, and that I think that a lot ties back into some of the findings from the white paper and some of the suggestions that have been made, and the additional powers being given to the ombudsman to make sure that social landlords are dealing with formal complaints. And I think being able to respond to customers who score you low in the first instance and be able to provide solutions before formal complaints happen is a huge thing. And again, that comes down to how capable are you to communicate with customers at that personal level and that one-to-one level. I suppose one of the questions I wanted to ask is in terms of having some of those conversations at the one-to-one level, how do you manage that when some of those conversations are a bit more sensitive? So obviously we've had COVID, we've got a significant financial impact to most people. I think most people have felt the pinch because of COVID in one form or another. I think social housing tenants probably felt it more than anybody. How do you manage your communication strategy when it's very sensitive issues like that?
Well, I think it's a couple of things, really. I mean, I think proactivity is incredibly important, which you've already sort of mentioned there, really, is those 1s and 2s. You're absolutely right. If you can quickly resolve somebody's issue, if you can listen to them, first of all, and then if you can nip things in the bud, then that's much less likely to manifest itself as a complaint going forward. Inevitably, some things do manifest themselves as complaints, and you have to have a really robust setup around how you deal with those effectively. And we're in the process of doing some work to kind of improve and change the way that we deal with complaints to make that really as good as it possibly can be. In terms of, you're right, the pandemic's been very hard on exactly the people that we support. So we will, if we think about 30,000 homes, well, there's undoubtedly going to be people who've been made redundant. There's undoubtedly going to be people who've been furloughed for long periods of time, who've had their finances impacted significantly. And I think so at income level particularly, we have an incredibly proactive income team. And again, the shift in their work has been that they try to intervene when there's low level arrears, and we offer money advice, and we try to approach that as tactfully as we possibly can. And actually, amazing, our arrears performance over the last 12 months has been really, really impressive. So that shift to proactive work through the VoiceScape product in particular has been excellent. And I guess it's a version of that for whatever you do, really. The other thing that we offer, which I think which has been a massive positive, and you could see the usage of that service go up, is we launched about 18 months ago something called our tenant support and wellbeing service. And I think that is a really unique and a great thing that's on offer to every single customer of ours. So the idea from it came from our employee assistance program, which actually is a kind of welfare program for staff, which offers things like counselling support, advice on money. There's an online and telephone counselling service as part of that, and various other elements of support. And we kind of thought, well, if we're offering that to our customer, to our staff, well, actually, should we be offering that to our customers? So we had a conversation with the organisation that managed that service. They'd never done anything like this before, but they kind of said, let's do a pilot. Let's do a pilot with your customers. And that's been really successful. So that's now been rolled out. And actually, we continue to add new things to that service. So I think we're actually going to be adding telephone counselling to the latest round of that service. So that means that every single customer that we have has access to a portal where they can have online counselling with an actual online counsellor. They're now going to be able to have telephone counselling sessions to a certain level, and they can access advice and support and signposting on all kinds of issues. And it's all completely disconnected from us in terms of the fact we get headline reports on the usage stats for intelligence, which again is very, very useful to help to kind of highlight some themes. So we saw that addiction was actually a theme for us in some of the areas we work in. But it obviously it's also a great thing for customers to be able to access 24/7 service, confidential. So we never know what people have called up for, or what they've accessed on a micro level. We just get the macro detail. And that's been a really important thing. And you could see over the last year, the usage of that has gone up as people have had more challenges to deal with. So it's trying to offer, I think it's trying to do all you can at a service interaction level, because what we can't do, for example, is say to people, don't worry about your rent for the month. It would cripple our business model, and we would rapidly be in dire straits and not be able to provide the support for everyone we provide support for. But what we can do is have conversations early on with people where they start to get low-level arrears and say, how can we support you? What help can we offer? And often that does, and the same for complaints and other things, that does often prevent things from escalating further. And I think the numbers we've seen over the last year have really shown that. And then it's about having things that can support customers just when they need it, really. And so the offer of the tenant support and wellbeing service, which is something that we pushed out several times during lockdown. The other important thing here about communication with customers is there's real value to keeping your powder dry. I've talked about a lot of stuff, but actually it's picking your moments. So if I think about when we communicated with customers during lockdown, on a bulk level, it was probably 2 or 3 times maximum during that period. And there's a reason for that, which is that you need to put the offer there, but actually that's it then. You need to make sure you've hit customers at key points. So for us, initially it was when lockdown first came in, and obviously we stopped doing anything but emergency repairs. So we needed to communicate that with customers, and we needed to give them options for how we were going to approach any routine repair bookings, and kind of say to them, look, if you've got something that can wait, please do, because we need to prioritize people who really need the services that we've got. Then, of course, when we picked routine repairs back up, we had a backlog. So we had to, again, go out to people and explain that. So these were our lead things. But within that, we could also say, by the way, we have a tenant support and wellbeing service. Are you experiencing any issues? Income. We were able to say, if you need money advice, here are so trying to be sensible and proactive about it, keeping the messages simple and focused, and not kind of going, actually, we need to get a message out about income. Let's send an email to 20,000 people. Oh, actually, now we need to send them out about repairs. Let's send another email to 20,000 people. Before you know it, it becomes chaotic and disjointed. And frankly, people get annoyed about it. If you think about your tolerance for how often you're willing to be communicated to by the equivalent of your landlord, I've had landlords in my life. It wouldn't be a great deal for most people. It would be knowing that support was there, but having the option to access it when you need it. And I think that's the balance we have to increasingly strike.
Yeah, so when it comes to that, what's your thoughts on navigating that issue of things like contact method preferences? Because, look, I'm cynical, so it really depends on who I'm dealing with. So if someone says to me, what's your contact preference? Now, if that's, I don't know, I've been online and I've ordered something off Boots the chemist, they get my email address, they're not getting my phone number. Because for me, email is easier for me to ignore. What's your thoughts on how do you navigate that? Because there's going to be an element of some people won't want to be disturbed. There's also the flip side of there's some messages which like your fire safety message, which are just so vitally important. You've got to make sure that they stick. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think that's the sort of $1 million question, isn't it, for any customer service provider? I mean, I think you have to strike the right balance. I mean, you've got what you've got to do as well is you add GDPR into that mix, and you add in another element of complication to it, really. But I think we've got to think about how we as customers act, and actually, the people who live in our homes are no different a lot of the time in terms of what they may have different needs. They may have more complicated needs, but the service that they deserve and that they expect is one that is easy to access when they need it, is one that doesn't pester them when they don't need it. So obviously there are things that we need to communicate with people. We need to tell people that when their rent's increasing, there's no opting out of that. We frankly, there would have been no opting out of fire safety advice in high rise, but there are some things that even through GDPR, we would obviously have the legitimate interest justification, because these are people that are our customers and our tenants. But there's an awful lot of other stuff which should be, frankly, down to a customer to decide whether they want that or not. And I think there's always been this in some of the other organizations I've worked in the past. It's been a kind of, oh, but they won't know about this. And it's like, but do you know whether they want to know about it? That's the point, really. And I think you've got to be, I think there has been a tendency in the past with housing providers as well to kind of say, well, we offer so much more. And actually it's our role to kind of tell people, during the summer holidays, what's happening in Coventry. It's not our role to do that. There are other ways for people to find that information out. And would you expect, if you were a private tenant, would you expect your landlord to give you that information? I don't think you would. And I think it's accepting that we have quite a young customer base. So actually, and we're a general needs provider. So everybody will be different depending on your organization. But for us, we've probably got a very significant proportion of our customers who only want to interact with us when they need to book a repair or they need to pay their rent. And even then they probably don't need to interact with us because they probably have a direct debit set up, or to tell us that they're leaving or something else significant. And the rest of the time, they only want us, they want to be left alone. So it's then about what are the other things that we need to communicate with them about, which will be things like rent and one or two other things. If they want to be left alone, actually, our only job is to, aside from getting them information that we need to get them, which will be very, very few things. Our only job is to make sure that when they want us, we provide them with a great service, so that one repair call they might make in 6 months, which could be their only interaction with us, you've got to nail it. You've got to make sure it's a good experience. You've got to make sure that when the survey comes through to them, they go, I'm going to give you 5 because it's the first time I've tried to contact you in ages. I only waited 30 seconds. The person I dealt with was brilliant. The guy who came to fix my tap was superb. Job done. You ask that person what their view of us is, and they'll give you a great verdict. And that's the bit that you can't, that's the bit that's so important, the transactional bit. So we're increasingly focused around that. Of course, there's other support. Of course, there's other things we'll do for customers. And then around preferences, it is about capturing the data. And it's not an easy thing to do for any organization, in fact. But we're trying to become much more sophisticated about it. So soon in our My Account customer portal, we will be offering customers the chance to update their information. We'll be doing a proactive campaign on that around their preferences and around their needs. But we won't be doing that until we've done the bit at our end, which is about educating staff to make sure that when that goes live, people are ready to deal with it from day one. Because the last thing, it would be a nightmare for me when we've got customer service scores of 4.6 out of 5, because we're trying to do a good thing by asking someone what they need and what they want, which is the right thing to do, we create dissatisfaction by then not fulfilling that. So, once, for example, you've asked someone if they need large print, if they say yes, you better be sending them large print emails and letters. Otherwise, they're going to be annoyed, and rightly so. So there is a balance there. But yes, all good customer service organizations will base their communication on what they understand and know people want to hear about. And if you don't have the intelligence to do that, that's where it becomes, there's a risk that you go, well, let's send the newsletter to everyone. Let's send this email about this to everybody without really, really thinking through, is that something that person needs or wants?
I suppose the last question then that I would have on that is, and you touched on Amazon earlier, how much of your communication strategy is now being led, shaped, influenced by that kind of, because you go to Amazon, you only need to look at one thing on their website and they will send you an email in a couple of days' time with 5 different things that are related to that. Is that a very similar approach to what you're taking?
I mean, I don't think it is entirely. I think I use the analogy of Amazon because I like to do that because it shocks people a bit. I think, oh, we're a social housing provider. How could you possibly compare us to Amazon? We're not Amazon because we provide a very different service. We provide a much more intimate service, and actually we can add more value to someone's life through providing them with a home than Amazon can by ordering a mug or whatever. But the point is the expectation. You've got to imagine that our customers could be at home right now, and they've got a bit of time. So they go onto Amazon, they order something, and straight after that, they want to book a repair with us. And that is how, and they will judge us. They will judge us on the difference between those interactions. You can still be an organization with social purpose who can add an immense amount of value to someone's life and provide a great, seamless, quick, engaging, and easy service. And that's the thing we've got to do. You can't kind of go, well, we're not, okay, our customer portal's not very good, but we add all this value for these people over here. It's not one or the other. It's got to be both. So I think in our approach at Citizen is, our social purpose is everything to us. Our purpose is, we provide homes that are our foundation for life. And that's what we want to do in everything that we do. But the point is, in fact, a fundamental part of that is providing a seamless, easy to use, great service. So, I don't profess that our customer portal is anywhere near as good as Amazon's website. They've got however many billions to put behind the development of making things as easy as possible. But what we have done, we did an exercise on our customer portal, for example, when we rebranded, to say, right, let's scrutinize this. Let's make as few steps as possible. Let's make it as easy as possible to book a repair, and for that to be as great an experience as it can be, realistically within the resource that we've got. So we rebranded the whole portal. So there's now a seamless experience between the website and the portal. You can book a repair within kind of a few clicks, really. So you can select what your problem is. You can book a time slot, which is great. And you have the ability to go on and amend and cancel those appointments as well. So we're getting near, with every step, we're trying to get nearer and nearer to the kinds of experiences you would have doing any other interaction. That's what we need to do. That is what we need to do as large organizations, and this is why when I talk about when I talk about using money responsibly, this is what I mean. Because if we send 3 letters out to all of our customers in a year, it's going to cost about 60 grand. Think about what you could do with that money. That could be the cost of, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but the customer experience platform, which is transformational in terms of understanding and then providing a great service. It could be money you spend revamping your portal so that every customer that goes on there has a great experience. This is why we've got to really scrutinize how we do things and not just accept it's how we've always done it. We've always sent letters to everybody, so we'll continue to do it. Let's think about how we can use that, because it's our responsibility to do so. Our customers deserve a great service just as much as anybody else. And that's what they'll expect.
If you're new to the Social Housing Podcast, please subscribe if you're listening via Apple Podcasts, or leave a follow if you use Spotify. Also, please remember to leave us any feedback, good, bad or ugly. It can only help improve us. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention. I appreciate that everybody's busy, but I do hope you learned something from the experience. I certainly did. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on the Social Housing Podcast. Goodbye.